Hey guys, recently I looked at the differences between socialism and capitalism, and I found a lot of different things, found out a lot of good information. Figured I'd talk about that for a little bit. Talk about the differences between socialism, capitalism, what's good for America, what we should be adapting, what other countries have adapted. Wanted to have a little bit of a realistic look, cut through some of the clutter, cut through some of the bias, and have a real talk about this. So, I'm Mike. This is The Other Side. So, if I'm talking about the views of different people, we got the communist left that absolutely loves the idea of socialism and thinks that the entire country of America should adapt it. And of course, you have the fascist right that love capitalism and believe that this is the way we should be going right now. So I decided to watch a couple of videos, get an opinion on this, and see what the two had to say. The one big thing that I think I realized from this is that at this point we are having two completely different conversations. So I looked at two different videos. One was from The Daily Show where they interviewed Bernie Sanders in regards to socialism, and the other one came from Prager University where they discussed the differences between socialism and capitalism. Those links will be found in the comments below. So the conversation was the difference between education and healthcare being affordable, being available for everyone, versus allowing the market to sort itself out in order for people to be able to make themselves a future, to become wealthy if they so choose. The answer may lay somewhere in between these two different arguments of capitalism versus socialism. Under capitalism, we say that the market will adjust itself according to need. If there's a market for something, then that market will grow, that market will become wealthy. If it's not needed, that market will ultimately fail. But the question often is asked in this conversation, what do you do in a market, such as the medical field, where it's not a really matter of preference or desire, but an actual need? What happens when you're in a system and you need something, and that thing is very easy to not only corner the market on, but to completely overprice? So what happens when we get put in a situation where we have a system that's so bogged down with the price and the demands that it becomes unfeasible for people? In the medical field, if you have to have a heart surgery or if you have some life-threatening disease, you will end up with a choice of having to either have a heart transplant or pay your mortgage. In a lot of those cases, you can't do both. So you either end up giving up your livelihood or your life. It should also be noted that when people these days are talking about socialism in America, they're not really talking about your traditional Russia or China level socialism or communism, as often likes to be attested. That's part of the biggest problem I see in the media today, is how we present things so far biased to our side that it becomes distorted and not even true anymore. And I'll be honest, that happens on both sides of the aisle, which is why I'm here to try and cut through a lot of that. So what are we talking about when we talk about democratic socialism? Because let's be honest, there is a difference between a democratic socialist and an authoritarian socialist, as Bernie Sanders here can attest to.
Obviously, Soviet Union was an authoritarian society with no democratic rights. And I think if you know history, you'll know that democratic socialists stood up and fought against that. You can look about what existed in the Soviet Union or in Venezuela. That is not what I'm talking about.
Now, of course, I can hear everyone saying, okay, but socialism has failed in other countries. It's not going to work here. And you know what? Maybe you have a point. Maybe other countries aren't the same as this country. But maybe we need to really end the binary conversation of socialism versus capitalism. Maybe what we need to do is sit here and look at what's really being asked for here. Because when we're talking about socialism in America, I don't hear anyone sitting there saying we need to get all of these companies in America and put underneath the government, which really is communism. But for a lot of people who make these arguments, there's very little difference between socialism and communism. So, what are we looking for here? What are we asking for? What are the liberals asking for in in all reality. What the liberals are asking for are more social programs in our capitalist society. Oftentimes we hear conversations about how Europe is doing so much better with their socialist programs. But I decided to defer to the gentleman from PragerU University to answer this particular part of the question.
What about Western European countries? Don't they have socialist economies? People seem pretty happy there. Why can't we have what they have? Free healthcare, free college, stronger unions. Good question, and the answer may surprise you. There are no socialist countries in Western Europe. Most are just as capitalist as the United States. The only difference, and it's a big one, is that they offer more government benefits than the U.S. does. We can argue about the cost of these benefits and the point at which they reduce individual initiative, thus doing more harm than good. Scandinavians have been debating those questions for years. But only a free market capitalist economy can produce the wealth necessary to sustain all of the supposedly free stuff Europeans enjoy. To get the free stuff, after all, you have to create enough wealth to generate enough tax revenue to pay for everything the government gives away.
So there you have it. We're not talking about socialism. We're talking about capitalism with greater social policies. This gentleman from PragerU can sit there and say those economies are not socialist. They're actually capitalist. But he still sits there and argues that they're a terrible thing, despite him saying that they're happy or better. But I guess that's all speculative. We can argue that. That's a different discussion altogether. Let's establish the baseline first. So in order to address this, we need to look at two basic facts. The first of which being, when the leftists talk about socialism, they're not really talking about socialism. They're just talking about stronger social policies. But on the other side of that, we do need to address the fact that putting anything under the government has never resulted in very great results. The VA is a perfect example. Look at the Department of Defense. It's overinflated. There's so much red tape in our government that it's hard to believe the idea that if we put education more under it, if we put more medical control under the government, it's hard to imagine that that's going to make it get better. So we can address these 2 points. But in the end, we have to acknowledge these two basic facts. There is a problem with our education and our healthcare system. They need to be addressed. They need to be fixed. But we have to look at this realistically. Is the government the best answer? And if it's not the best answer, then what is? Currently, the healthcare is so greatly under the free market system that there should be no problems with it. But we see people dying in the streets. We see people going homeless, starving. We see problems in the healthcare system. Now, to address the specific healthcare problems, that's a whole nother video altogether. But it is a conversation that needs to happen. At the same time, no one wants education to be completely unattainable for anyone, whether it's a poor person or a wealthy person. The college education system needs to be available in there for everyone. We can argue about whether or not it's overhyped and that you don't really get your money's worth out of it. That again is a different conversation. It should still be available. It should still be an option. We shouldn't only see people of wealth being able to get through these great degrees. It shouldn't be someone who came from a privileged background that is a doctor. And I'm not saying that that is the current case, but I am saying that if you have a lot of money, if you're coming from money, getting a college education is going to be a lot easier for you. There are programs for the less fortunate. Those programs start to get less and less once you hit more into the middle class. Say, for example, someone who is able to afford a good lifestyle, maybe they're not wealthy enough to get their children into college. The point of this video isn't to address how to fix healthcare or how to fix the education system. Those are only symptoms of the overall problem, as is the ever-growing gap in between the wealthy and the poor in our country. It's another symptom. The point of this is not to find the solution right now, but to open the conversation, to acknowledge the fact that there is a conversation that needs to be had, and to eliminate this binary thinking of it either has to be this way or that way, socialism or capitalism, free market or government. That maybe there is some kind of other solution, some kind of middle ground, something that needs to be done. I think we can all agree, left, right, conservative, liberal, whatever the case, there is a problem. There's a problem that needs to be addressed here, and we don't need to address it through extremism. We don't need to address it by the most off-the-wall policy. We don't need to go full capitalism or full communist or anything like that. We just need to talk about it and find that reasonable middle ground solution. I'm Mike. This has been The Other Side.